are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's case is a survival story. A woman who fought every step of the way for herself and for women to come. If you don't know, it is my absolute passion to tell these stories. I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so. So if that's something that you'd like to support me in doing, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed with the post notification bell on, giving this video a thumbs up, and leaving a nice comment down below. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1982 in Florida, and the Thurman family lived there. This was Tracey and her husband, Charles, who actually went by Buck, as well as their infant son, who was named Charles Jr., but nicknamed CJ. They had met when Tracey had moved from her hometown of Torrington, Connecticut, all the way to Florida at 17 years old after she had gotten a job as a maid at a hotel. Now, she had fled from where she had grown up right after her mother passed away from cancer. The two were said to have such a special bond that she could no longer stay where it reminded her of her mother. You see, Tracey had always been a mama's girl, but she took it a step further in the 10th grade when her mother was diagnosed with cancer and she dropped out of school in order to take care of her. She wanted to be her caretaker, and the two spent every moment together after that. This also meant that she didn't get a formal education, which left her with very few options for jobs once her mother passed, and she had to go on and make a living to support herself. But Tracey was a caring girl, one that knew what sacrifice meant, but also didn't complain about her circumstances. She was also said to be stunning, with brown hair and matching brown eyes. Now, Tracey's job at this motel actually led her to her husband, Buck, because he was a 20-year-old at this time, just 2 years older than her, and he was actually staying at this motel with some family while he worked on construction in the area. The connection was enough for them to begin seeing each other, even though they didn't live in the same area, and that is when they decided that they wanted to have a relationship. Not long after, they were married. However, this was not a happy family. You see, after 3 years of being together, they had their son CJ, and almost 2 years later, Tracey had left with the 16-month-old CJ and moved back to her hometown of Torrington, Connecticut. Now, she began to realize that she wanted a divorce from Buck, and she started staying with some friends in the area, and they were Judy Bentley and Rick St. Hilaire, who welcomed her and her son in with open arms. They actually had an apartment on Hoffman Street. But 8 months later, 23-year-old Tracey would end up in the Hartford hospital with her son being on the verge of no longer having a mother. Except this nearly 2-year-old at 22 months old had no idea what was going on. You see, on June 10th of 1983, Tracey's stalker had arrived at her friend's apartment. This was a man who had been making her life a living hell since she moved back to Torrington. A man who followed her, threatened her, and made her fear for her life. The man in the backyard was creating a scene and demanded to see her outside. He began ranting, causing a scene, and her baby, CJ, was still sleeping in the house. What occurred next was one of Tracey's biggest fears, because an event that she told everyone was going to happen did. Yet no one believed her until it did, and it was too late. Tracey was already in the hospital with 13 stab wounds on her face, her shoulders, and her neck. 3 holes were in her esophagus, and her lungs were filling with blood. There was also a bruise on her face that was from a boot print. I haven't even gotten to the worst part yet, because Tracey's neck had also been broken. The doctors began telling her that if she survived, she would never walk again. Meanwhile, her ex-husband was being arrested for the attack. Although to Tracey, it was a surprise that investigators arrested him, because she had been crying for help to those same investigators for months and had been ignored. You see, the day Tracey's husband, and now ex-husband, had become her stalker was 2 weeks after she had moved to Torrington. It was October 22nd of 1982 when Buck Thurman showed up at her apartment uninvited. Now, Tracey's friends allowed him in, not really knowing what he was capable of or really knowing how serious the situation was, what Tracey was escaping from. But when Buck entered the home, everything seemed okay. So Tracey's friends left her in the room to kind of have a conversation with with, who was still her husband because they had not yet gotten a divorce. But 3 phone calls were made to the police that night. Buck had come to this apartment to take back his family because he wanted them to go back to normal. He'd attacked Tracey, ranting that no one else was ever going to raise their son. He grabbed her by her throat, and when investigators finally decided to show up and take this seriously, he threatened Tracey in front of them, and they still did nothing. Investigators got him off the property, but after they left, he did return, and Tracey's friends actually had to bar the door shut to make sure he couldn't get in. The apartment owners even filed a complaint that he was criminally trespassing on their property, but this was denied. But this wasn't the last time that Buck would attack, because he would become Tracey's stalker, watching her every move, following her everywhere she went, and knowing where she was 24/7. That's when the attacks on Tracey got even worse. On November 1st, Buck showed back up at the apartment, choked Tracey, and told her that if she called investigators again, he would kill her. Now, he demanded again that they move back in with him, and Tracey continued to say no. She stood up for herself, even though she was incredibly frightened. And that is when Buck decided to grab CJ and run out of the house. He said that if they were not going to raise this baby together, then no one would. A kidnapping had just occurred. CJ had been taken out of this home without his mother's permission, and this had to be when investigators got involved. Correct? No. When Tracey and her friends went to the police department to get help for finding her son, they told her that there was no need because Buck was his father. Tracey was all alone in this, more alone than she thought that she was, and that is when she mustered the courage to negotiate a deal with Buck. She said if he brought CJ back to her unharmed, that she would have a discussion about moving back in with him. However, when he finally brought CJ back and CJ was back in her arms, Tracey felt no relief. She knew that he knew where she lived and he would return. In the middle of his visits, Buck would call her constantly, threatening her, and that is when Tracey filed her first written report about what was happening. The police did nothing, noting that she was still legally married to this man and that this was a marriage problem, not an investigator's problem. And that is when she decided to take her fight a step further. She was going to get a divorce from this man. If they were looking at this from a marriage perspective, since she was still married to him, she was going to take that away. The problem was there were rising rates of women who were filing for divorces and not enough resources to help them. And Tracey didn't care. She decided that she was going to do it on her own and learn how. So that is when she began taking a class that taught her how to go through this divorce process on her own. And that is when she found that every woman who was taking this class was also a domestic violence victim, and they were looking for a way out. She was baffled by this because at first she had thought that she was the only one going through this, and she was ashamed of it. She thought she was all alone against these officers who didn't believe her, but it turned out she wasn't. Only 4 days after the second attack, on November 5th, Tracey would have it affirmed to her that no matter where she was, Buck would find her, because Tracey had gone to the family relations office that was right above the police department because she had been called for a meeting there. You see, Buck had gone there himself and had a meeting where he wanted to get visitation rights. And because they had to talk to the mother before doing anything, they called Tracey in. But as Tracey left, she began driving down the road when Buck ran out in front of her car and stopped her. He began yelling and threatening her, saying, "I will get you, and when I do, I will really hurt you." She refused to get out and talk to him, and he was getting angrier by the second. That is when he rammed his fist into the windshield, shattering the glass. All of this occurred while an officer named Neil Gemelli was just down at the block. He watched all of this happening, but he only made a move to do anything when the glass was shattered. He didn't care that this woman was being threatened. That's when he found it necessary to arrest Buck and bring him down to the station for a breach of peace. It appeared as though stopping this from becoming a scene was more important than the safety of a woman. But this is something that many women at this time were very aware of. Buck was brought to trial for his breach of peace, and he was given a suspended sentence for 6 months of basically probation, where he wouldn't go to jail unless he committed another crime during that time. He was given the suspended sentence because Buck said that he would stop harassing Tracey. He was also given 2 years of conditional discharge, which basically meant that this was a minor crime, and because of that, the court believed that they could divert the criminal from committing another offense by ordering them to have this time period where they had to meet these specific conditions, and then after that ended, it would be off of their record. Meaning that although Buck got in trouble, it was more like a slap on the wrist, and he was now a free man. He was told to return to Virginia to be with his father and stay away from the apartment. But we all know that this didn't happen. 2 weeks later, Tracey called the police department again. No officer came to help or made a move to arrest this repeat offender who was on probation. By this point, the stalking had been happening for months. In 1992 turned into 1993, and Tracey continued to make reports to the police, to the Torrington Police Department, and continued to be ignored. Officers told her this was not their business because she had married this man. Yet Tracey had been living away from him for 8 months by this point, and in May she actually filed the divorce papers and they were served to him. Even while Tracey was away from the apartment, Buck would just show up and stand outside, and neighbors who knew about the situation began calling Tracey and telling her that he was there so she wouldn't return. While fighting for her own life, Tracey was also fighting for the safety of her little boy that Buck had already showed that he was able to and wanted to kidnap. She knew exactly when Buck was served the divorce papers as well, because the threats got much worse. He was saying that he would shoot them both.
I knew he was following me, but some of the time he didn't approach me. He had told her that he was gonna take me into the woods. I wouldn't feel a thing. It'd be over with quickly. So he put it in the fear into us that he was going to shoot me. And when I called the police department, they said there was nothing they can do because he wasn't bothering me.
Tracey couldn't do it anymore, not by herself, so she marched into the Torrington Police Department and demanded that they arrest her husband because he was breaking his probation. However, they ushered her out 5 different times while telling her a different excuse as to why they couldn't do anything. At first, they told her to come back another day, and then they promised to arrest him when she came back in. But then on May 6th, Tracey went in and requested a restraining order to be placed against Buck. She said, "I believe I am in immediate and present danger," and thankfully this was granted to her. But unfortunately, a piece of paper with no backup from investigators provides zero protection. On May 23rd, Buck showed up at the apartment once again. Tracey called the police and begged them to come and take her down to the station if they wouldn't take him, just so she could be away. And surprisingly, they did so. However, when she asked them to arrest Buck, she was told she would have to wait until after the Memorial Day weekend. So the final straw came when she went back after that weekend and was told that the investigator on her case was on vacation and they could do nothing. Enraged, Tracey's brother actually called the police department to confront their lack of protection, and they told him that they were going to arrest Buck on June 8th. Now, while waiting for this, on May 25th, Tracey told police that Buck told her that he would kill her when the divorce became final. On June 10th, Buck was still a free man, 2 days after they said they would arrest him. He was free enough to show up at the apartment that afternoon and demand to see Tracey. The police were called at 1:20 p.m., but 15 minutes later, Tracey finally went outside to make him stop threatening to kidnap CJ once again, which is what he ultimately planned to do. She went outside fearing that the police were not coming at all and she would have to deal with herself once again. But Tracey was then dragged by her hair across the backyard while Buck began stabbing her in the face, shoulders, and neck 13 times. Meanwhile, 25 minutes later, after the 911 call had been placed, an officer named Frederick Petrovitz pulled up at the home and sat in his car. When the officer finally decided to get out, he went up to the front door and knocked. He didn't get an answer, and that's when he heard screaming in the backyard and headed back there to see what happened. Now, he then saw what he said was just a knife, and he took the knife and he went and placed it in the trunk of his own vehicle, leaving Tracey bleeding on the ground. At this point, Buck stomped on Tracey's head until she had a broken neck. This was with his heavy work boots, and he then ran inside to grab CJ. And he then dropped the baby on his mother and screamed at him, "I killed your effing mother." He continued to kick Tracey, and the officer made no move to arrest Buck. He was still trying to attack her when the ambulance came 40 minutes later, and the neighbors who had begun hearing what was happening came out to put themselves in between Tracey and Buck while the officers were doing nothing. They just stood there watching and waiting for the ambulance to show. As she was taken off the ground and placed into the ambulance, Buck threatened her more and then tried to jump in the ambulance and attack Tracey once again. She was unconscious by this point, and he was finally handcuffed.
And Buck had come to the house wanting to talk to me. And I had a restraining order at the time. Called the police department. Said that he was there. And he says, "No, you called the effing cops on me." And then at that point I saw Buck go into his back pocket. And then that's when it dawned on me that he carried a knife. And then he grabbed me by the back of the hair. And next thing I knew, he stabbed me in the face. Then he threw me down on the ground and stabbed me in the back of the neck. And I heard Buck go upstairs. And he grabbed our son and came down and stomped on my face, broke my neck, said, "I killed your effing mother."
Tracey's sister, Cheryl, drove manically behind the ambulance trying to keep up while they took Tracey to the hospital. At the hospital, tubes had to be put down Tracey's throat so she could breathe. Her spinal cord was damaged and her right side was partially numb. She also had no feeling in her left fingertips or from her left knee to her toes. She had to have an emergency tracheotomy, which left a scar across her throat, and she was also in a wheelchair for the first time in her life. When she woke up, doctors began telling her that it was a miracle that she survived and that she was now a quadriplegic and would never walk again. Tracey actually refused to believe this. She told them that she wasn't, and she began working on becoming physically stronger. The problem was there were men on her ward, and every time they got near her, she panicked, thinking that they were going to attack her, even though they too were paralyzed and unable to walk. Tracey had to learn how to eat, how to walk, how to do everything once again, and she was in the hospital for the next 8 months. She was then released and was told she could go to physical therapy once a week. She said that this wasn't enough. She was going to be going 3 times a week. She absolutely hated when people would tell her that she wouldn't get better. At this point, she was still partially paralyzed, and it felt like she didn't know when she was stepping. But for little CJ, he had gone almost a year without seeing his mother, who was in the hospital. So when she was rolled through the door, he actually spit at her and began crying, saying he wanted his old mommy back. Thankfully, it's believed that CJ doesn't actually remember what happened that day, but what is stuck in his subconscious and what he saw during that traumatic attack is unknown. But Tracey and CJ survived, and although their past had been an everyday fight for safety and continued to be a fight for healing and peace, their monster was finally locked away. Tracey recalled that when she first started this relationship with Buck, he made her feel safe. Buck was her protector, and since she had little family left, this was everything she wanted and more. As the relationship progressed, Buck had shown signs of being possessive and jealous, and that didn't stop Tracey from loving him because he had already love-bombed her, and now she was blind to his rage. When he got jealous of her talking to other men, when he yelled, when he punched walls, she believed that it would get better. Tracey was also a strong girl who believed that she could stand up for herself, so when the tantrums began, she yelled back. When Buck escalated to hitting her, she hit him back. Tracey believed for that first few moments of anger that she was in control, an innocent mindset that stopped her from leaving. There was also the constant reminder that her boyfriend had a horrible childhood that made him the way he was. Buck would constantly say that when he was a kid, his mother was often beaten by his father when he was drunk, and although going through that as a child is traumatic, Buck was playing the victim not to express his feelings and to heal, but to manipulate his own girlfriend into staying whenever things got bad. Now, Tracey just thought about how Buck's own father was in a completed rehabilitation program and had changed into a peaceful, better person, and she had faith that Buck could do the same. This all had occurred before Tracey had got pregnant with CJ and before the two were married. The belief that a child would save the relationship did plague the family, and the two wed prior to CJ's birth, and so when their family went from 2 to 3, Tracey began dealing with the struggles of taking care of a newborn while also dealing with Buck's growing anger. That's when the abuse and the sexual assaults from her husband got even worse. And in October of 1982, Tracey decided enough was enough. She was not going to put her son through this, and she took CJ and left. That is when the 8 months of horror began. Horror worse than she could have ever predicted. And it turned out that the police were not the only individuals who knew what Buck was wanting to do to his wife and did nothing about it. You see, Buck had begun working at a diner, and it was found that he would tell customers and coworkers that he planned to kill his wife, and then he would show them his knife. At his trial, Tracey actually hired a bodyguard to protect her, and the first officer at the scene that day, Petrovitz, said that he hadn't seen a body. He only heard a scream, and then he saw the knife, and he took it because he thought this man had stabbed a chicken or a dog. Officers then claimed that Tracey never asked for Buck to be arrested. Buck then didn't admit that he ever threatened her, but he didn't deny it either. He also showed zero remorse. His lawyer then said that he suffered from a mental impairment that altered his decision-making, that he had an emotional level of a 6 or 7-year-old and capable of controlling his violent impulses. But Buck was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, his attorney appealed this, saying that the judge failed to instruct the jury that they couldn't look down on him for not testifying. A retrial was ordered, but it was settled on a plea agreement, and then Buck was sentenced to only 8 years. But this small sentence was not all that Tracey was going to fight for. A year after her attack, she filed a lawsuit against the entire city of Torrington and the Torrington Police Department, especially for violating her civil rights and failing to protect her. She said that they took the laissez-faire approach, which basically meant that they let things take their own course and didn't interfere. It was brought up during Buck's trial that Captain Al Columbia actually acknowledged that officers actually failed to check the terms of Buck's probation and that threats against unmarried parties would have been handled differently. But the defense attorney named Jesse Frankel said Tracey was not a battered woman. Most of those incidents weren't physical confrontations. They were only phone calls. She was setting Buck up for the divorce proceedings, building a record against him. Thankfully, nobody listened to that, and the jury faulted 24 city police officers and 40% of the task force for Tracey's attack. Tracey was then awarded $1.9 million, and she decided to use it to just try to heal and have a normal life again. She invested most of it, but she ultimately wanted to go back to work, and she also just wanted to be able to lift CJ into her arms again.
There wasn't a personal attack on me from the police department. I mean, they just weren't trained for that. Back then, they just handled everything differently than they handle it now. To begin with, I was really angry at what happened to me. I was angry with the police department for a long time. You know, I'm not gonna ever be the same physically, emotionally. I mean, just that one day changed my son's whole life.
Tracey's lawsuit actually created Thurman's Law, or the Family Violence Prevention and Response Act of Connecticut, that forces police to make arrests in domestic violent cases even if the victim doesn't press charges. They are required to take the abuser into custody and to make sure that domestic abuse is categorized as a crime. A few years later, CJ still had anxiety about his mother. Every time he would hear an ambulance, he would panic, and I'm sure that he didn't even know why. He would always want to know if his mommy was all right. Tracey had to use her wheelchair for a year, but then actually graduated to a wheeled walker. Tracey then decided that she wasn't going to do very many speeches or put herself in the limelight because she didn't want CJ growing up like that and to be reminded of what had happened all the time, but she did tell her story to today and to 2020 so that what happens to her never happens to another woman, but she still doesn't let CJ watch that until he's older. She said that mainly she wants to keep CJ away from it because when he was younger, he mentioned wanting to go after his own father for what he did, and she didn't want him to be like that. Buck Thurman was released only after 8 years of serving time. Tracey felt like she was still being punished and wondered if she would ever feel safe again, especially in Torrington. When CJ heard the news, he began asking if his daddy would hurt him, and she would tell him that the policeman would protect them, wouldn't let anything happen, but then she realized that she was lying to her own son. She said that Buck didn't receive intensive therapy, and he didn't obey the law before, so why would he now? Buck was actually given an ankle monitoring device and a lifetime restraining order preventing him from being in Torrington at all, but Tracey obviously still had a hard time trusting this. And Buck even said at his hearing, "Tracey, I'm never going to bother you again. All I want is to let that baby know I love him." However, even though Tracey was angry at how the police handled everything, she still felt sorry for the first officer on the scene that day. She believed that he was an older officer and he was used as a scapegoat. He even retired a week later, and he died in 2017 with the attack haunting him every day up until then. Tracey did end up getting remarried to a carpenter named Mike Modozik, whose brother married her best friend, and that's how they met. However, officers had to be at their wedding because there were threats made against Tracey. But she continues to live in Torrington where everyone knows what's happened to her, so she doesn't have to rehash everything and make sure that she's safe somewhere else. She's also thought about going back to school to become a therapist because she knows that that is the person that helped her heal through everything the most. She said she was so angry for the longest time and she felt sorry for herself, but now she can actually enjoy life. She tried to go to women's shelters to speak for a while, but she would get too emotional hearing everybody's stories and what they had been through. Now in 2006, she had healed a lot of her emotional trauma through this, but she then was diagnosed with thyroid cancer and she had to get her thyroid removed. When she got out of this surgery, doctors actually told her that she had stray pieces of her thyroid behind her collarbone and her lung from when she was attacked. And she said after hearing this, she was just brought back to that place of anger because she thought that she could forgive what happened to her, but then something like that happened and Buck still had a hold on her. Tracey's main mission when she isn't fighting for herself and her family is to fight for other domestic violence victims. She has said people must view domestic violence as something entirely despicable, like driving drunk. There must be harsher penalties for abusers. Right now, there is no step between release and jail. School children must be taught that violence is wrong so the cycle of abuse isn't repeated. And society must accept women as equals, not objects to be controlled.
9 out of 10 times the warning signs are there. Just listen to your instincts. Don't ignore the warning signs because they're there. And when you see the warning signs are there, get out. Get out before it's too late. And I know there's that fear. I know what that fear is like. I just wouldn't want to see anybody go through what I went through. Or even worse, not be here to talk about it.
There was also a movie created about her story called A Cry for Help. By 2008, Buck had moved to East Hampton, Massachusetts, and had married a woman named Christine. The two had a son together, and it is said by everybody who knows them that Buck is a contented spouse and father, and there was no record of violence at the home. However, this didn't mean that he had learned his lesson or that he was no longer abusive, because a woman, also in Massachusetts prior to this, had accused him of choking and sexually assaulting her, and she actually filed a restraining order against him, but he violated this and was arrested. Soon after, she had to flee the state to get away from him. Buck has been questioned about, this case, what he did to Tracey since he was released. And he said, with the things I've been through with this in the last 20-something years, I'm not really willing to talk about it. Every time I talk, it always comes back to hit me in the face. I am tired of hearing about it. I really truthfully just wish it would die. But I don't think it ever will. But if that's what they want to keep doing, so be it. Around the same time, their son CJ was a 26-year-old man. and he was found to be in prison at this time. He had assaulted an ex-girlfriend and had violated probation. He also had a record for handgun and drug possession and stealing $22,000 in gambling proceeds. Tracey says he's made some bad decisions, but she believes he will do well in the end and that he is not like his father. Now, in 2018, Tracey was honored for her support for victims of domestic violence over decades with the Susan B. Anthony Project. She said that she would not be there without everyone's support, that she speaks out so others can be helped. She also will talk to survivors anytime that they need her to, and Tracey herself was a survivor, one who changed domestic violence laws forever. But do you believe that CJ's crimes are of nature, of his father's genetics, or are they due to nurture, possibly seeing the attack on his mother? Do you think that he really is living peacefully with his new wife, or has he just gotten better at hiding his abuse? I really hope that's not the case, and I hope Christine is okay, as well as their children. But you have to wonder if someone can really switch that quickly from being this stalker who nearly kills his ex-wife to this wonderful husband and father. Tracey Thurman is a hero to so many people, and that's why I believe her story deserves to be told. She is the reason that so many people in Connecticut have been able to get out of domestic abuse situations and are no longer held down, held back, and harmed by the people who are supposed to love them the most. But don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Remember that my last video is right here. There's a playlist of my videos here, and if you want to subscribe to this channel, you can click right here. If you want to subscribe to my vlog channel, you can click right there. Okay, bye.